"You're fired." Those two words hit me like a defibrillator shock to the chest. I stared across the conference table at Victoria Crawford, the woman I'd served champagne to at her wedding, the woman whose husband I'd considered my best friend for 15 years, as she slid the termination papers toward me with the casual indifference of someone throwing away trash. "Effective immediately," she continued, her blood-red lips curling into what might have been a smile if smiles could carry poison. "Security will escort you out." My hands went numb. 12 years of building Crawford Medical Group from a two-room clinic into Charlotte's premier cardiac center. 12 years of covering for her husband when his drinking nearly killed patients. 12 years of sacrifice, loyalty, and friendship. Erased in 12 seconds by the woman I'd trusted enough to make my best man's wife. But as I sat there in stunned silence, watching Victoria's lips curve into that satisfied smirk she thought I couldn't see, she had no idea she had just signed her own death warrant. Because what Mrs. Victoria Crawford didn't realize was that the man she'd just discarded wasn't just another employee. I was the keeper of every secret, every shortcut, and every skeleton that her husband had buried in the closets of our medical practice. And in exactly 5 days, she would lose everything. Before we go any further, welcome back to Revenge Stories with Kyle. And if this is your first time watching any of our videos, we encourage you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it motivates us to continue creating even more powerful stories for you. So stick with us to the very end. And if this story moves you, drop your comments and share with a friend. Now, let's dive back in. My name is Marcus Sullivan. I'm 41 years old, and until that gray Monday morning in October, I was the chief administrator of Crawford Medical Group, a thriving multi-specialty practice in Charlotte, North Carolina. For 12 years, I had been more than just an employee to Dr. James Crawford. I had been his right hand, his problem solver, and what I thought was his friend. James and I met during my residency in healthcare administration at Duke. He was completing his fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery, brilliant but scattered, more comfortable with a scalpel than a spreadsheet. I was the organized one, the guy who could make sense of the chaos that is modern healthcare administration. When he approached me about helping him start his own practice after our programs ended, it felt like destiny. We started small, just James, myself, and 2 nurses in a cramped office space near Presbyterian Hospital. I handled everything that didn't require a medical degree: scheduling, billing, insurance authorizations, staff management, regulatory compliance. James focused on what he did best: saving lives and building a reputation as one of the finest cardiac surgeons in the Southeast. Those early years nearly killed me. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. When my daughter Emma was born, I missed her first steps because I was at the office dealing with a Medicare audit. When my wife Sarah's mother was diagnosed with cancer, I had to take work calls during chemotherapy sessions because James couldn't handle the administrative crisis of the week on his own. When the practice nearly went under during our 2nd year because of a billing software disaster, I slept on the office couch for 3 weeks straight, manually processing insurance claims until we got back on track. "We're building something important," James would say during those brutal early days. "This sacrifice matters. We're not just running a business, we're saving lives." And we were. The practice grew from that tiny office to a sprawling medical complex with over 40 physicians across 8 specialties. We had satellite locations throughout Charlotte, a surgery center, and even our own medical helicopter service. James became the face of the organization, the charismatic doctor who appeared on local news programs and gave keynote speeches at medical conferences. I remained in the background, the invisible force that made everything work. James met Victoria at a charity gala 5 years ago. She was a former pharmaceutical sales rep turned healthcare consultant, whatever that meant, with porcelain skin, platinum hair, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Their wedding was featured in Charlotte magazine, a lavish affair at the Ballantine Hotel that cost more than most people's houses. I was his best man. Sarah and I sat at the head table, watching James light up in a way I hadn't seen since those early days of the practice. I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. But something about Victoria always made me uneasy. The way she would appear at the office unannounced, asking pointed questions about our finances. The way she would interrupt our meetings to pull James away for urgent matters that never seemed to materialize. The way she looked at our patient files when she thought no one was watching. About 2 years after the wedding, things started changing. James became distracted, irritable. He started missing surgeries, not showing up at all, leaving me to reschedule operations and deal with angry patients and their families. The drinking started subtly. A flask in his desk drawer, the smell of whiskey on his breath during afternoon consultations, slurred words during staff meetings that everyone pretended not to notice. I covered for him. Of course I did. When he was too intoxicated to perform a critical valve replacement, I quietly arranged for Dr. Patricia Hayes, our head of cardiology, to take over while telling the family that James had been called away for an emergency. When he made medication errors that could have killed patients, I discreetly corrected them and implemented double-checking protocols. When he approved treatment plans that made no medical sense, I found ways to guide patients towards more appropriate care without undermining his authority. Then came the Morrison incident. 8-year-old Tyler Morrison needed emergency cardiac surgery after a bicycle accident. It was a complex procedure, the kind James used to handle with his eyes closed. But when he arrived at the hospital, he was barely coherent. He fumbled with his surgical instruments, couldn't remember basic procedures, and nearly nicked the aorta before Dr. Hayes physically removed him from the operating room. I spent the entire night doing damage control, working with the hospital's administration and our legal team to contain the situation. Tyler survived, thank God, but the family was threatening to sue, the hospital was questioning our surgical privileges, and the medical board was launching an investigation. That weekend, I drove to James's house. We needed to talk. This couldn't continue. Too many lives were at stake. Victoria answered the door in silk pajamas and an expression of pure disdain. "He's not taking visitors," she said curtly. "Victoria, this is serious. The Morrison case could destroy everything we've built." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "Everything we've built? Marcus, darling, you seem to be confused about your role here. You're an administrator. James is the doctor. This practice exists because of his talent, not your filing skills." The dismissal stung, but what bothered me more was the coldness in her voice. This wasn't concern for her husband. This was something else entirely. "Where is he?" "Sleeping off a migraine. Doctor's orders." She started to close the door, then paused. "You know, Marcus, you've been looking a bit tired lately. Maybe you should consider taking some time off. A permanent vacation, perhaps." The door closed with a soft click, but her message was clear. If you want to see how this story of betrayal and justice unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now because what happens next will shock you. But first, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been treated like you were invisible by the very people you sacrificed everything for? Drop your answer in the comments below because I have a feeling many of you will understand exactly what I went through.
That night, I couldn't sleep. Something was very wrong, and it wasn't just James's drinking. I started thinking about the changes I'd noticed over the past year. Large sums of money being transferred between accounts, new consulting contracts with companies I'd never heard of, equipment purchases that never seemed to arrive. All of it coinciding with Victoria's increasing involvement in the practice's business affairs. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early and started digging through our financial records. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 18 months, nearly $2 million had been systematically diverted from the practice's accounts. Fake medical supply companies, phantom consulting fees, equipment leases for machinery that didn't exist, and all of it traced back to shell companies owned by Victoria's healthcare consulting firm. Victoria wasn't just married to James, she was stealing from him, from us, from the patients who trusted us with their lives and their money. I was still processing this discovery when James stumbled into the office at 11 a.m., looking like he'd slept in his car. His hands were shaking, his eyes bloodshot, and he could barely stand upright. "We need to talk," I said, closing my office door behind him. I laid out what I'd found as gently as possible. Bank records, transfer authorizations, fake vendor contracts, all of it bearing Victoria's signature or authorization. James sat in stunned silence as I walked him through each piece of evidence. "She's been stealing from us, James, from the practice, from your patients." He looked up at me with hollow eyes. "I know." Those two words hit me like a physical blow. "You know?" "I found out about 6 months ago. Confronted her about it." He rubbed his face with shaking hands. "She told me she was protecting us, that the practice was in financial trouble and she was moving money to keep us afloat. By the time I realized what was really happening, why didn't you come to me?" "Because she said you were the one who told her to do it." His voice broke. "She said you'd discovered some irregularities in our Medicare billing, that we were going to be audited, that this was the only way to protect the practice from federal charges." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Victoria had used James's trust in me as a weapon against both of us. "James, you have to know I would never—" "I know." He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "I know that now. But Marcus, you don't understand what she's capable of. She has recordings, photos, evidence of my drinking, my mistakes. If I don't cooperate, she'll destroy not just me, but everyone who works here. All our doctors will lose their licenses. All our staff will lose their jobs. The patients who depend on us." I stared at my friend, this brilliant surgeon reduced to a trembling shell of himself by the woman who was supposed to love him. "We can fix this," I said, "together, the way we always have." He shook his head. "It's too late. She's already won." The next morning, James announced he was taking a leave of absence for health reasons. Victoria would be stepping in as interim administrator while he sought treatment. The Board of Physicians approved the arrangement. They had no choice. James still owned 60% of the practice, and his recommendations carried weight. For 3 days, I tried to work with Victoria. I presented her with strategies to correct the financial irregularities without exposing the practice to legal liability. I offered to work with our attorneys to clean up the mess quietly. I even suggested we could frame it as discovering billing errors from a former employee. She listened to my proposals with that same cold smile, nodding politely, and ignored every word I said. Then came Monday, the restructuring. My position eliminated, my 12 years of dedication erased in 12 minutes. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling. Sarah was waiting in our kitchen, still in her scrubs from her shift at the children's hospital, where she worked as a pediatric nurse. She took one look at my face and knew. "What happened?" I explained everything. The firing, the embezzlement, Victoria's manipulation of James, the threats against the practice. Sarah listened in growing horror. "This isn't right. This isn't justice." I nodded, staring out our kitchen window at the garden Sarah had spent years cultivating. Like the practice, it had been built with patience, care, and love. And like the practice, it was worth fighting for. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to take back what's mine," I said quietly. "But I'm going to need help." That evening, I called Dr. Patricia Hayes. As head of cardiology and the senior physician at the practice, she had influence with the medical board and connections throughout Charlotte's medical community. "Marcus, I was so sorry to hear about your termination. The timing seems suspicious. Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Have you noticed anything unusual about the practice's finances lately?" There was a long pause. "What kind of unusual?" "Missing equipment, vendor payments for supplies we never received, consulting fees for services that couldn't be verified." Another pause, longer this time. "Marcus, I was going to come to you about this. Several of us have been concerned. Dr. Rodriguez ordered a new cardiac catheter system 3 months ago, a $250,000 purchase. The payment went through, but the equipment never arrived. When he tried to follow up with the vendor, they claimed they'd never heard of our practice." My heart started racing. How many incidents like this have there been? At least 6 that I know of, maybe more. "Marcus, I need you to document everything. Every missing order, every phantom payment, every irregularity you can find. And I need you to do it tonight." "Marcus, what's going on?" "Victoria Crawford is stealing from the practice, systematically, and I think she's planning to do a lot more damage before anyone notices." The next morning, Tuesday, I called an emergency meeting with the practice's board of physicians. As former chief administrator and current shareholder, I owned 15% of the practice through a profit-sharing agreement James had offered years earlier. I had the right to request such a meeting. Victoria was furious when she found out, but she couldn't stop it. The board was comprised of the senior physicians, and they had their own concerns. Dr. Hayes presented her findings first. Over $800,000 in equipment orders that had been paid for but never delivered. Another $300,000 in consulting fees for services that couldn't be verified. Dr. Rodriguez had discovered that our malpractice insurance premiums were being paid to a company that didn't actually provide coverage. We had been uninsured for the past 6 months without knowing it. Then I presented my evidence. The shell companies, the diverted funds, the systematic looting of accounts that should have been used for patient care, staff salaries, and facility improvements. The room fell silent as the scope of the theft became clear. Nearly $2 million stolen over 18 months, critical equipment ordered but never received, insurance policies that existed only on paper, a practice that appeared profitable on the surface but was actually being hollowed out from within. Victoria sat at the far end of the conference table, her face a mask of calm professionalism, but I could see the slight tremor around her hands, the tightness around her eyes. "These are serious accusations," she said finally, "but they notice come from a disgruntled former employee who was terminated for cause." "What cause?" asked Dr. Hayes. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. "Insubordination. Refusal to implement necessary cost-cutting measures." "Cost-cutting measures that involved stealing equipment money?" Dr. Rodriguez's voice was sharp with anger. "I resent the implication." "It's not an implication," I interrupted, sliding a final document across the table. "This is a forensic accounting report I had prepared yesterday by an independent firm. It traces every fraudulent transaction directly to companies owned by you or your associates." The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria's composure finally cracked. If you're enjoying watching karma catch up to people who thought they could get away with anything, hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to reveal will absolutely blow your mind.
"You think you're so clever," she hissed at me. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with. I have enough dirt on this practice to shut it down permanently. Every regulatory violation, every billing irregularity, every malpractice incident that James covered up, I have it all documented." Dr. Hayes leaned forward. "Are you threatening us?" "I'm stating facts. James Crawford is a drunk who's been practicing medicine while intoxicated for 2 years. This practice has been billing for procedures that were never performed, prescribing medications without proper documentation, and covering up surgical errors that should have been reported to the state. If you want to play hardball with me, I'll make sure every doctor in this room loses their license." The threat hung in the air like poison gas, but instead of the fear Victoria expected, I saw something else in the faces around the table: determination. Dr. Hayes was the first to speak. "Victoria, what you're describing is exactly why we need new leadership. Leadership that prioritizes patient care over personal profit.
I am the interim administrator of this practice, Victoria snapped. James appointed me, and I have full authority. Actually, interrupted a new voice from the doorway, that's not quite accurate. Everyone turned to see James standing in the entrance to the conference room. He was sober, clean-shaven, and wearing a suit I recognized from our early days building the practice together. Behind him stood two people I didn't immediately recognize, a man in an expensive suit and a woman with a federal badge clipped to her jacket. "James?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in treatment." I was in treatment. For 3 days. Long enough to get clean and think clearly for the first time in months. He walked into the room, his eyes fixed on his wife, long enough to remember who I used to be before you convinced me I was worthless. He turned to address the room. "I'm hereby resuming my duties as medical director of Crawford Medical Group. My first official act is to terminate Victoria Crawford's employment effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." Victoria shot to her feet. "You can't do this. I have contracts, agreements." "You have nothing," James said quietly. "Every document you claim gives you authority was signed while I was under the influence of alcohol and prescription medications you were secretly giving me. That's called coercion, Victoria. It makes every agreement null and void." The federal agent stepped forward. "Mrs. Crawford, I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Unit. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." As the handcuffs clicked around Victoria's wrists, she looked directly at me, her eyes filled with venom. "This isn't over," she whispered. "Yes," I said quietly, "it is." Wednesday brought a parade of federal agents, forensic accountants, and attorneys. They seized computers, financial records, and boxes of documents. The investigation expanded beyond Victoria's theft to include the shell companies she'd created and the network of accomplices who had helped her steal from not just our practice, but from other medical facilities across 3 states. By Friday, the scope of Victoria's crimes became clear. She had systematically targeted medical practices with vulnerable leadership, doctors dealing with addiction, divorce, or financial stress. She would insinuate herself into their operations, gain their trust, and then slowly bleed their practices dry. Crawford Medical Group was just her most successful target, but investigators found evidence of similar schemes at facilities in Atlanta, Nashville, and Jacksonville. Friday morning, exactly 5 days after my termination, I walked back into my office to find James waiting for me. "I owe you an apology. More than an apology. I owe you my life, our patients' lives, everything." I sat down across from him, studying the face of the man who had been my friend for over 15 years. The haunted look was gone, the tremor in his hands had stopped. He looked like the James I remembered from our early days building the practice together. "The drinking?" I asked. "One day at a time. But Marcus, it wasn't just the alcohol. She was medicating me, mixing things into my coffee, my food, benzodiazepines mostly, just enough to keep me confused, compliant. The FBI found pill bottles in our house with my name on them for medications I never prescribed for myself." The full horror of Victoria's manipulation was still coming to light. She hadn't just stolen money, she had systematically destroyed the man I considered my brother, turning him into a puppet she could control. "I'm staying clean. I have to. For the practice, for our patients, for myself. But Marcus, I can't do this alone. I never could." "You don't have to," I assured him. "We're partners. We always were." He slid a document across the desk. "New partnership agreement. 50-50 ownership. Equal decision-making authority. No more hierarchy, no more junior partner dynamics. We're in this together completely." I stared at the papers, emotions churning. After everything we'd been through, after the betrayal and manipulation and near destruction of everything we'd built, James was offering me true equality in the practice I'd helped create. "There's one condition," he said. "We implement new safeguards, multiple signatures required for any major financial decisions, independent audits quarterly instead of annually, complete transparency with the medical board and our physicians. No one, including me, should ever have enough power to put this practice at risk again." "Agreed," I said, signing the partnership papers. The following weeks brought more revelations about Victoria's crimes. She had stolen over $3.2 million from Crawford Medical Group alone, but investigators estimated her total theft across all her victims approached $15 million. She had created an elaborate network of fake companies, forged documents, and bribed officials to cover her tracks. Her trial was swift and devastating. The evidence was overwhelming, and her attempts to shift blame to James or claim she was protecting the practice fell flat when prosecutors presented recordings of her admitting to the schemes. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all her victims. The divorce proceedings were equally one-sided. James's prenuptial agreement included clauses about criminal behavior and breach of fiduciary duty. Victoria walked away with nothing. No alimony, no property, no assets. Even her jewelry was seized as part of the restitution order. 6 months later, Crawford Medical Group is stronger than ever. We've expanded our services, hired new physicians, and implemented the most robust financial oversight protocols in the state. Our patient satisfaction scores are at an all-time high, and we've received commendations from the State Medical Board and the Joint Commission for our transparency and ethical practices. The practice that Victoria tried to destroy became more successful because of the attempt to destroy it. James is thriving in recovery. He attends AA meetings religiously, has a sponsor he talks to daily, and has rebuilt the surgical reputation that made him famous in the first place. More importantly, he's become the friend and partner I always knew he could be. As for me, I'm exactly where I belong. In my office, managing the practice we built together, protecting the patients we serve, and ensuring that no one will ever again be able to threaten what we've created. Sometimes I think about Victoria, serving her sentence in a federal facility that's a far cry from the luxury she once enjoyed. I don't feel satisfaction. Too many people were hurt for that. But I do feel a sense of justice. Complete, perfect justice. Because that's what happens when someone mistakes kindness for weakness, loyalty for stupidity, and trust for vulnerability. Victoria Crawford looked at me and saw just another employee to discard. What she was really looking at was the one person who knew every detail of the empire she was trying to steal. She fired me on a gray Monday morning, her blood-red nails drumming impatiently as she eliminated 12 years of my dedication in 12 seconds. 5 days later, she lost everything. Her freedom, her fortune, her future. And me? I'm still here, still fighting for what matters, still protecting what we built, still standing.
If you loved and enjoyed this story, do not forget to hit that subscribe button, like, and share. Until our next update, take care.